Cabbage White Publishing presents The Carbon Code Chronicles, written and narrated by Sky Mandrake. Fall 1944. Rusty blinked his heavy eyelids and slowly became aware of his surroundings. Feeling the warm glow of sunlight peeking through the large windows onto his tanned, weathered face, he was surrounded by white walls and partitions made of sheets and hospital beds. He wonders,
"Am I in heaven?"
as he begins to regain his senses and an awareness of his athletically toned body. He sat up quickly. Grabbing for his leg, he realized it was no longer there. He lied back down, flopped his head against the pillow, and grinned. For a moment, his mind wandered to the sound of bombardment, explosions, men yelling and screaming in pain, dogs growling and barking, gunshots, and bullets whizzing through the air, and then silence. He was wide-eyed and stared off into the distance, as if he were in a trance. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a woman's voice, and his ears perked up. She began to walk toward him, but he was unable to see her, taking large, confident strides across the floor in Rusty's direction. She turns to a tall, clean-cut gentleman in front of her and replies,
"Yes, sir. He's right here. Let me check on him to see if he's awake."
The nurse gently tapped Rusty on the shoulder, and with a bright smile and a golden flash in her eye, she says,
"You have a visitor."
Rusty decided the nurse was an angel with those cosmic golden eyes, in comparison to the battlefield of hell he just came from.
"Golly, I must really be in heaven,"
he tells himself. A confident military man steps out from behind the partition and with a serious face tells Rusty,
"You son of a bitch, you did it."
Thomas removed his beret, clasping his hands together while pulling up a hard, creaky chair next to the hospital bed. Out of respect and habit, Rusty quickly saluted his commanding officer. Knowing exactly what Thomas meant in regards to his mission, Rusty looked at him with painful tears behind his eyes. He flashed back to the events that put him into this predicament, stumbling out of a dusty bunker and into the haze of light. Looking down at the blood and dirt on his hands, he tucked away what looked like a papyrus scroll into his satchel. His face reflected a violet glow. Returning to the present, Rusty smiled, attempting to joke with Thomas.
"You're damn right I did. And I'm going to take you up on that drink once I get the hell up out of this bed."
Both of them laughed like they were old friends. Rusty was glad Thomas stopped by briefly to see him. After all, he was technically not even supposed to exist. Now, there are people out there who were afraid of war, people who talked about war, people who studied war, and then there are those who created and designed war. Thomas Westside happened to be the one who created and designed theaters of war. He was what they call a god, a mover and a shaker, privy to information only known by the world's most powerful elite, whom were also referred to as the gods. He orchestrated the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and how wars were to be conducted. By any means necessary, he gathered and collected knowledge in order to build winning strategies that won on the battlefront. To him, the term, whatever it takes, coincided with the void of having any fear and an indifference to any loss, which was required to be in a position like this. Straight, cold tact. Driven by preordained powers, he had successfully mastered dealing with all forces, including dark forces. He had a knack for finding the truth and depth behind deception and illusion. A lover of music, magic, mystics, and mystery, he surrounded himself with artists, mediums, storytellers, magicians, and people he referred to as talented or gifted. He spent most of his days channeling messages from various sources in order to locate specific people who were destined to play big roles in history, just like Rusty. Rusty Jones could also be considered a god, coming from a royal yet humble bloodline. He was a spiritual visionary and no stranger to the mystical ways of the world. He could sense the paranormal from a mile away by detecting the subtle changes in energetic forces. He was tall and tan with dark, wavy hair. He inherited his family's handsome traits and sensitivity to drama by being a part of the motion pictures. His popularity among the people caused him to be chased frequently by beautiful women, including covens of witches that wanted to trap him and use his gifts. He often outran, outsmarted, and defended himself against those with malicious intentions. Painfully aware of the repetitive cycles of spell work and curses that were cast onto his life, he surrendered to the highest source. He understood the reciprocity of magic, justice, and karma, as well as the protective power of prayer. Thomas, being the savvy and resourceful man that he was, knew he would find the visionary he needed for this specific moment. He was to make significant progress in a losing battle, as foretold by his advisors. This particular visionary, Rusty, was considered special or a gift, not only because he would help Thomas win the war, but the visionary's bloodline was destined to do great things for the gods in the future. Rusty was seen as an omen of good fortune, and in Thomas's mind, one lucky son of a bitch. Thomas hung up the phone, swiveled around in his leather-bound chair, and glared at the scrolls he had collected over the years, which were tucked away neatly in the wall of his study. He couldn't help but scratch his head, spending the last couple of decades searching for clues and information about scrolls with unknown origins. He needed help answering the lingering questions he had about the scrolls that he could not seem to solve, recalling a memory where he found Rusty lying in the back of a jeep on the battlefield. He remembered being focused on the mission and pulling out an unknown item that appeared to be glowing from the satchel attached to Rusty's torn-up body. He did not think Rusty was going to make it. He recalled trying to clear his mind of all the men he had just lost. Thomas took in a deep breath and sighed to regain his concentration. He could not put reason behind the glowing light that came from the scroll. This ray of light had been burned into his memory. Over the next several years, similar scrolls with similar definitive markings had been added to the collection. He began to refer to this particular set as the trade scrolls. Some of them provided in-depth details about ancient trade routes, ports, goods, and taxes collected, all of which were of great value to the gods. The detailed information had been overlooked by previous holders, who failed to see their value. When the series of scrolls were pieced together and completed, clues to a much bigger picture lend the holder prosperity in trading. The Master Scroll retrieved by Rusty was wrapped around a fragmented clear quartz wand with a blank purple-hued papyrus canvas. When rolled out, the papyrus appeared to be saturated with dried-up blood pooling around the edges. Intricate designs and symbols carved into the cedarwood ends translated into the phrase, "May you be happy." Thomas hypothesized the glow he saw that day may have been a reflection of the papyrus through the quartz, as the gemstone was often used as a paperweight and for magnification. Rubbing his chin, he still could not fill in the missing piece of the puzzle and mysteriousness of this blank scroll. He wondered how it fit with the rest of the collection, and this kept him up at night, swimming in a bottle of whiskey. Out of frustration, he recalled Rusty again. He slid his chair back from his desk, pulled out a drawer, and quickly thumbed through his files. He paused once he found the folder he was looking for. Pulling out the file, he flung it open onto his desk and picked up the phone. Decades went by after the Second War ended, and a new battle was on the horizon. Thomas decided it was a good time to begin making plans regarding another winning battle strategy, and found some resistance from the gods. They were worried about his habits of self-medicating. They tell him this time,
"We're going to have to be very careful with planning and preparation in order to handle the events forecasted for the turn of the century."
Thomas thinks to himself,
Jesus, isn't every campaign handled in the same manner?
as he shrugs off their procession of tasks that they need him to check off as just another formality. Despite the gods' hesitancy, they allowed Thomas to continue collecting intelligence on potential candidates. They continued to select and champion the best to join their ranks. He had been scouting for them for decades. Thomas had an eat, drink, and be merry attitude, which was a byproduct of managing his self-respect. He knew at any moment we could all die. He was well aware of the harsh reality of death, as he had lost legions of people over time. There was nothing the gods could do about his behavior, even if they wanted to. They created their monster and had to deal with his antics, one of the consequences of staying in power. Thomas reached out to Rusty in 1970 and told him he needed a change of scenery from the high-profile streets of the city. Without telling anyone, he traveled to the Rocky Mountains of Paramount, where Rusty lived. Paramount was a quiet place, and Rusty understood his need to get away. They met up to reminisce about the old days, and they ended up spending a lot of time at the bars, day drinking, discussing business, talking with women, and partying in hotel rooms. Thomas brought the Master Scroll with him on his trip to visit Rusty. One night after Rusty and a brunette bombshell passed out in their hotel room, he quietly moved the scroll near Rusty and could not believe his eyes. The scroll began to glow. Instinctually, he had a feeling this might be the case, that Rusty was the missing piece of the puzzle. The surface of the papyrus lit up in a hexagonal pattern of what looked like fluorescent violet gold liquid. Standing there in shock, he about fell over onto the floor and woke them up. Rusty groaned in his sleep and turned over. Thomas froze, standing half naked in his boxers with the scroll in his hand. He stealthily moved away from their bed and into another room, where two blonde women laid crashed out on an exotic hotel rug in their birthday suits. Not having to distance himself too far before the glow disappeared, he made a shocking discovery. Squinting out of disbelief, he closed his piercing blue eyes and ran his fingers through his thick blonde hair.
Fuck, Rusty is the key. He must hold some special kind of power from the scroll, if not more. How am I going to find out how he is connected without letting him in on the secrets we have learned thus far?
Thomas puts away the scroll in his bag, threw his muscular body onto the couch, and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. Another sleepless night for Thomas, as he contemplated all of the different scenarios that might play out if and when he decided to disclose the truth about the artifacts to Rusty. Telling Rusty should be straightforward, but he knew how Rusty was discriminated against by society in the North for having one leg, and because he was from the South, he felt for Rusty and knew better than to treat his brother with nothing other than respect, despite the gods turning their nose up at anyone they felt were less than them. Conventional and ignorant people treated Rusty like trash, and Thomas found it heartbreaking to watch his men endure this type of injustice. He swears to himself,
I will do all I can to help Rusty and his family after all he has sacrificed.
Letting Rusty in on the god's secrets was the least he could do. Thomas and Rusty met up the following evening at the bar for drinks. With his arm overhead, while leaning against the jukebox, deep in thought, Thomas punched in the code C4 into the machine and selected the song Creedence Clearwater Revival's Traveling Band. He returned to the bar to sit with Rusty drinking his drambuie. After a moment, Thomas looks at his glass, swirls the liquid around, and turns to Rusty and says,
Let's go back to the city. I can show you around. Introduce you to some gorgeous women. What do you say?
Rusty, being a ladies' man, looks up, finishes his drink, slams the glass down, and says,
Okay, let's go.
Thomas had known Rusty for over 2 decades, and he trusted him enough to teach and tell him about the ways of the North status quo, beyond military protocol. They both shared a knowledge of war stories and conspiracy theories, like squadrons disappearing into thin air, rumors of shit that had gone down during the war, forecasted prophecies of the future, ancient mythos and lore. But there was a lot more that Thomas needed to share with Rusty, and he was losing time. While in Paramount, Thomas received a message from the gods at the hotel desk. Written on a piece of paper with the hotel letterhead were the words, "It's absolutely time," which meant they wanted him to bring them updated information regarding current events. This meant Thomas would have to also consult with the esoteric dark arts and seek additional guidance regarding the contents of the collection of scrolls soon. His faith was fixed on his version of a true north, the higher power that moved him, combined with his knowledge that there was a need for balance, and in order to know the enemy, he had to become the enemy. With most of his council being back in the city, one of them happened to be his best girl, Claire. Thomas decided earlier to enlist Rusty once again to come along and meet her. He felt like Rusty would be able to handle the details about how their relationship came to be via Claire's foretold prophecy. It was very, very, very important that he learned more about how these artifacts operated around Rusty. On their way to the city, Thomas turns down the radio playing "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay" by Otis Redding and asks Rusty,
"How did you know? You know, which artifact to take out of all of the items they had stashed away?"
Rusty replies,
This.
holding up a worn-down arrowhead necklace made of black obsidian hanging from his neck. Thomas had seen the pendant many times on Rusty, but never thought much of it.
"Damn, does it have magical powers or something?"
Thomas laughs.
It's been handed down in my family through several generations. It's a protection amulet.
Rusty murmurs,
As I entered the bunker in the dark, I walked through aisles of inventory and saw the artifact glowing. I'd like to think the amulet led me to it.
Thomas begins to deduce the possibilities in his mind.
Rusty or the amulet?
Rusty didn't say much more about what happened, as most veterans of war tend to do. The horizon of the city shimmered across the water as the mist and sunset shone through the clouds of dense fog. The wheels in Thomas's brain kept spinning. He knew there was more to investigate. All he needed to do was hurry up and wait. 2. Thomas and Rusty arrived to the city. Thomas reached out to Claire to let her know they were going to stop by her place that evening. He began to feel butterflies in his stomach as he truly believed she was the most beautiful goddess alive, and he could not wait to see her. A highly intuitive psychic medium, she was the one he puts his trust in completely. She had been very helpful to him many times in the past. Thomas and Rusty slowly approached the front steps of Claire's place in their best dress. Thomas holds out his hand to stop Rusty to pause for a moment.
"She might be a little mad. We haven't seen each other in a very long time."
Rusty acknowledged his hesitancy with a laugh. After all, this was the woman he heard Thomas cry out for many times on those really rough nights.
Claire with the beautiful hair."
He recalls Thomas wailing away in his sleep. Thomas slowly reached up to ring the doorbell while briefly glancing down at his outfit. A buttoned-up jean shirt layered over a turtleneck, tucked into a pair of fresh, dry-cleaned pressed pants, brown belt, and boots. He held both his breath and his jacket to secure his confidence. Rusty stood by leaning onto his cane. He was also decked out in a matching suede pantsuit, dark belt, half-buttoned-up shirt, and his amulet. They stared through the stained glass window at the flowy silhouette of Claire's windy, bohemian style. They began to see the details of her long caftan and silk headscarf, which wrapped around her long, curly, sandy blonde hair. Turning on the lamp, she unlocked the door for them. A neon light from the storefront window gleamed across their faces. Opening the door in her bare feet, adorned with an ankle bracelet with tiny bells, toe rings, and a fresh coat of polish, she looked at Rusty and then Thomas with her big bedroom eyes. Squinting at Thomas with a side eye, she says,
"Come inside,"
and walks through the parlor. She wasn't upset, just annoyed that she had become accustomed to information being hidden from her, despite being all-knowing at the same time, especially when it came to Thomas and all of his secrets. Thomas Westside and Claire Hardy had been through a lot together. As they developed a history throughout the decades, they found unconditional love for each other. establishing that feeling of family and comfort. To Thomas, she was home. Claire approached the bar and poured Thomas 2 fingers of his favorite drink, Glenfiddich, into a glass. Thomas sat down on the sofa, and Rusty pulled out a chair from the round table placed in the middle of the room. Rusty gently ran his hand across the purple velvet tablecloth before rubbing his kneecaps out of nervousness. Immediately she took a liking to him, as he appeared to not be like some of the arrogant pricks Thomas used to run around with in the city. Thomas placed a record onto the turntable and lowered the needle to play House of the Rising Sun by the Animals at a low volume. There was some tension in the room. It was filled with a deafening silence. None of them were talking, and they appeared to be more focused on the sound of the individual drops of rain now splattering onto the windows. Claire knew it was going to be a very long night, but also an enlightening one. She knew Thomas would want to pick up where they had left off the last time they were together, discussing and discovering clues about the trade scroll's prophecy and bloodlines. Both Claire and Thomas sat down with Rusty at the table to make an attempt to bring him into their inner circle. Tonight, they were going to channel the spirit to help them envision the future on a grand scale, requiring more from Rusty than just his presence. Claire was going to need a droplet of both Thomas and Rusty's blood to make a prediction for the gods. Thomas saw Claire's predictions as either go big or go home in regards to taking them seriously. She utilized all of her divination tools to get the most accurate readings. Thomas didn't waste any time or care about the outcome of any ritual, as long as they made progress. He focused on figuring out the mysteries at hand. Rusty was not bothered by the idea of giving this woman some of his blood to see if there were some sort of link between him and the scrolls. He understood the permanent and total sacrifice of war, and in his case, this involved a lot of bloodshed already spilled in hell. Rusty consistently read the Marian Bible. Thomas was also familiar with the Bible and referred to it from time to time. They both knew the power of redemption, deliverance, saving grace, and God's victory. They both knew they were merely players of a manufactured game chosen by the gods to carry out their mission. The record player spun to a stop. Claire pulled out a charged dagger and cut into both Thomas's and Rusty's hands, combining their blood into a sacred bowl made of silver. Thunder and lightning crashed through the sky, and the lights flickered out as the spirit entered the room. The gods were watching them from the eye in the sky as they sat around the table. Claire began her reading by candlelight. After a moment, Thomas and Rusty's blood began to transform into a red-blue swirl instead of a solid red color. She looked up at Rusty with promise and shock. Turning to Thomas, whom she perceives as being a master sleuth, gasps and says,
"My God, you've done it again. You found another one of the key lineages mentioned in the Trade Scroll's Prophecy of Excellence."
Referencing the bloodlines or keys discussed in the general Trade Scroll collection, indicating those who lived instinctually under the motto, love, loyalty, and excellence. Thomas and Claire exchanged looks, as if some deep dark secret had come to pass. Rusty's royal blood was one of a blue-violet formula, and when combined with Thomas's normal blood, they failed to mix together, pointing to the possibility of a missing piece or key to be added to the list of clues needed to solve the mysteries of the Trade Scroll prophecies. Maintaining her composure, Claire says,
"I'd like to start the reading with Rusty if you don't mind, Thomas,"
and closes her eyes. Rusty noticed a subtle shift in her face and tone of voice. There appeared to be an underlying sadness. Claire and Thomas already knew Thomas's fate. This was foretold knowledge that gave Thomas the security he needed to enter threatening situations, because he knew how he was going to die. Claire continues to analyze the sources laid out on the table.
"Rusty, I see many suns and moons passing, like the rings of an eclipse, both dark and light. A third eye finds its way and disappears as if there is some sort of gap. I cannot see beyond a certain point. There is a child experiencing great sadness. They are in pain from oppression, torture, attempts to murder them and alter their mind. They are persecuted, hated, isolated, and despised for no reason other than for their love and courage. They have the courage and heart of a tiger, which is going to help them overcome obstacles greater than those any of the gods could ever achieve. Some of the gods will not like their abilities to outshine them. However, the gods that matter will spare them, because this person will be the kindest and most loving person to walk the earth. Your bloodline has been cursed, and this is going to make their journey difficult, as they have been chosen to break many generational curses.
Rusty asks Claire.
What are they going to do that is so bad?
She says,
Nothing other than live their life with great love. The gods avoid getting their hands dirty. They dislike dealing with trade, as if it's beneath them. Even though trade is their bread and butter, they associate prosperity from trade as some sort of speculation or dishonesty in business practices. So, they have created a system where merchants are only able to make profits by lying, bribing, or deceiving the consumer. Successful merchants, like yourself, gamble, take risks, and rely on luck to prosper, in which they dislike. It looks like the child is going to have some sort of extraordinary luck and fate, with the star card suggesting stardom or healing. The Wheel of Fortune card suggests this is part of their fate, while the Ten of Pentacles card suggests wealth from family or the establishment of fortune. Could be anything, only time will tell and reveal the truth.
Rusty shakes his head.
So there's nothing I can do to prevent them from getting hurt? That seems like a lot to take on.
He utters. Claire took in a deep breath. She knew both Thomas and Rusty had lived through some horrendous torture and endured brutal combat and training.
I'm sorry, but it looks like there is nothing you can do. Your pain or karma will be passed down through your bloodline by way of this curse. Thomas is to play a large part in the story, now and in the other world.
Thomas sighs, knowing his fate. He says,
Now what?
Ready for most challenges, intuitive readings from Claire were to be treated as business as usual with Thomas. Rusty stared into the distance, thinking about his own past and visions of the future. He had experienced his own communications with the spirit world. Rusty could feel the room's energy shift. The candles began to pulsate and flicker, as if the spirits were urging him to talk. He tells himself,
I made a promise to never divulge the curse on my family with just anyone.
1, because the curse caused his family to endure a lot of heartbreak over hundreds of years, and 2, he didn't want anyone getting any bright ideas to try and intervene with the breaking of said curse. Claire rose from the table and grabbed from a pile of scrolls placed in the wall. She grasped an old scroll in her hand, tied with a leather strap which had the word quietus, or gain, written in cursive Latin along the edge. She unrolled the scroll onto the table and began to read as if she knew the words verbatim. Pointing to a section written in what looked like dried up blood, Thomas stands up, looks away, and complains.
I am so tired of hearing about the prophecy.
While holding on to the back of his neck, the words written on the scroll began to morph into a comprehensible language related to the bloodlines of the reader. Rusty began to read.
Children of chaos, stalked by angels, guarded by darkness, to be left alone, playing God will bind, like the kings of carbon.
He sees diamonds flickering.
Pressure from the people will not be kind. Key bloodlines cross like the winds of trade.
He sees a DNA strand rotate.
As they seize, prosperity will ease. With eyes on the stars, lovers will stir the waters from afar. Fallen to the lady of the night, clever will make it right. Attempts to steal a treasure, be sure to win the fight. True blue stays loyal to the end, and betrayal will be an only friend, requiring spirits for them to blend. Only their sacrifice will make amends. A great liar will set their world on fire. When currency is the soul's desire, refuse to lose heart, and think again before taking the fall. Remember, amor vintitomnia.
He sees a heartbeat frequency. Composed and calm, Rusty shrugs his shoulders and with a serious look on his face asks Claire,
What does it mean? How does it involve me?
As if he didn't see anything supernatural while reading the passage. Claire stands up and grabs a book from the shelf.
According to additional readings about the eligible keys of excellence, those keys influence business, or the prosperity portion of the trade scrolls. This scroll is now considered to be the forecasting oracle used to build the god's fortune. Any deviation from advice given from the scrolls may lead to an end of their prosperity, especially if they are unable to stay on top of interpreting the passages of the prophecy. Those key bloodlines in the passage are talking about what we assume to be similar to your bloodline, bringing stability to the business aspect of trade by way of great love, because amor vincito mea, or love conquers all. Thomas has orders to gather the clues.
Claire continues.
Thanks, Claire.
Thomas rolls his eyes.
The amazing part of it all is how well the both of you get along. Thomas may end up serving a different role because we are under the assumption that key bloodlines would clash with each other, sort of like the whole Romeo and Juliet saga.
She stresses.
To fulfill our part, Thomas is to take in, care for, and train what we call one of the keys. They will continue to align with events the both of you have set into motion by retrieving the scrolls. Whomever they are will love your grandchild, Rusty. Remember the gap where I was unable to see anything in the reading? This indicates that the person will not be any of the children you have now. Seers are unable to see those who are not born yet because they do not exist in this realm. There will be many obstacles and dark forces that will try to prevent the union of the two. They will both have to battle with the principalities of darkness.
Rusty stood by listening to what they had to say.
Claire, would you please reveal to Rusty the kicker?
Thomas began to direct the conversation. Claire jumped to her feet and pulled out a journal from the top drawer of her roll-top desk that was dedicated solely for Thomas. She flipped through the pages and clutched a card she had tucked away in the binding. She reads,
For the one Thomas calls his own, the heart of evil, which has chosen darkness for the greater good, will cancel all inequities, requiring the courage to walk an unnatural path for a length of time in order to rescue that which it loves.
Claire begins to cry, and Thomas tells himself,
And this is the reason why I dislike this business.
Wiping away the tears from her eyes, she continues with the key bloodline reading.
I'm seeing supernatural beings, those of which are not human. I see rogue entities of dark magic, false prophets posing as gods, placing challenges on anyone they want to prove worthy as being part of the divine. This child's heart is pure, and evil would like to enlist them. People who think they are good will want to destroy them, as they are the gatekeeper to everything, and without them, nothing ceases to exist. Until we learn more about the scrolls, it is a mystery as to what will happen after that.
Thomas rubbed his eyes and looked over at his good old pal, Rusty Jones. Sitting across the way at the table, looking confused as ever, he rested his head on his hand, with his legs crossed, wondering if they had already disclosed too much to Rusty. Claire looks into the distance and mutters,
What are we going to do about all of this? Thomas Westside.
Keep it light, Claire. I don't have time for all this shit. And make plans, too.
Thomas snaps at her.
Let's go get a drink, Rusty. I need some air.
He exclaims with urgency. He stood up to reach for his jacket. Rusty lifts his cane up toward Thomas to halt him from leaving and says,
Wait, you need to hear something.
Claire knew Rusty had been withholding a secret from the reading, but left their guest alone and did not say anything. She had learned many times with Thomas to not push for information. Trembling on the inside, yet bomb-proof on the outside, they all knew that whatever came next would fill in gaps and potentially reset the course of the future. Rusty, a master at keeping secrets, helped carry forward his family's story, which had been passed down from generation to generation. Each chosen family member was instructed to wait for the most suitable time to share the past with people who could understand the tale. The consequences of having knowledge of the generational curse could potentially lead to loss. Those chosen people would have to have an understanding that their involvement would potentially mean crossing paths with evil and darkness. There was a responsibility to help guide others to break the curse of the hybrid eclipse. Thomas stopped in his tracks, closed his eyes, and spun around.
I get it, Rusty. Try being told that in order to attain certain powers you will have to sacrifice that which you love. I feel your pain, brother.
Rusty was still hesitant to share the story with the both of them. He kept the secret close to his cursed, broken heart, sighing with the deep breath he tells himself,
If there were ever a time to share this story for the greater good, it would be now.
Deep inside, he felt as though the reading had been speaking directly about him. Rusty stood up, swallowed the last of his drink, and put his glass down on the table. He leans onto his cane toward Thomas and Claire and says,
We're going to need another drink. Brace yourself for this shitstorm.
Thunder clashed overhead. Claire poured more Glenfiddich into a highball glass, and Rusty begins to tell his story.
You know these damn generational curses go back for hundreds of years. Let's go back to the 1700s. This story has been passed down for over 200 years in my family, with each griot, or storyteller, entrusted to carefully get us closer to face off with the evil we are speaking of.
Claire and Thomas looked at each other and nodded their heads in agreement. Evil happened to be an old friend to everyone in this room, therefore making good a thorn in the side of what they knew best. Thomas burdened to find the good that would love evil, while at the same time trying to prevent evil from destroying good. Finding the balance of the two was going to be a major pain in their ass. Thomas knew eventually there would be a need to fight fire with fire to defeat the worst kind of evil. In order to do so, he would need to find the perfect person to embody and wield evil for the difficult task at hand of fulfilling the Trade Scroll prophecy. The gods would not have it any other way. They enjoyed and encouraged manipulating the lives of others to create grand stories of love that led to heartbreak and oppressive cautionary tales. Rusty recognized the sacrifices Thomas was going to have to make, and he envisioned a good outcome. The challenge would be to train someone strong enough to embody evil long enough to stop evil. Rusty lit up a Lucky Strike cigarette and blew smoke from his mouth. While shifting all of his weight onto his cane, he walked over to a stained glass window, pausing to tap his knuckle on the glass, where he could see the heavy rain drizzling down. Rusty blurred his focus in the distance, where the city lights were reflecting in the rain puddles strewn across the street. Further out, he saw the moon and stars amidst the clouds mirroring the waters of the skyline, where his vision began to expand and fade into the heavy storm clouds above, brewing off the northwest coastline of Africa sometime around the 1700s. 3. Three large ships thrashed and crashed against the growing waves in the sea, as billowing dark clouds above shoot lightning bolts across the sky. The first ship is a xebec vessel known for its speed and agility. The name Ignis Fatuus, or Foolish Fire, had been burnt across the stern. The gazelle-like ship, boasting Phoenician purple-dyed sails with silver-plated oars, carried a Spanish prince, disguising himself as a merchant from the islands of Chance. Charlie was a handsome man, having a medium build, long dark wavy hair, mocha-colored skin, puppy dog green eyes, and a short trimmed beard with a mustache. A bit of a miser, yet extremely humble, he had little interest in sexual conquests, but was a romantic at heart. Wherever he traveled, the ladies were attracted to his calm and steady, deep water vibes. As a prince, he grew tired of the royals' need for bloodthirsty battles of the conquistadors. Preferring bottles to battles, he resented the idea that his family had everything, so he sought out treasures for himself. While tracking the Spanish fleet for the royal family, Charlie was able to intercept Spain's communications regarding the location of their reserve supplies, found right off the coast of North Africa, near the Straits. His vast knowledge of trade routes allowed him to also hop to the less traveled islands. He carefully burned a map of the Spanish reserve location into a piece of leather, keeping the details on how to find his way back secretly tucked away near his heart. He daydreamed often of taking all of the reserves, rum, salts, cigars, chocolates, furs, and trinkets. Even though his ship could hold 36 guns on the top deck, its humble size made it susceptible to rolling. If conditions of the waters were to become too choppy, he could lose his cargo, needing extra help with transporting the loot back to the port of Casablanca. He made his way to a small island off the coast called the Gateway to Hell. This is where outcasts waited for perfect opportunities to present themselves. Charlie quickly befriended the man on the second ship, which was a massive galleon. The Moonshine was outfitted with huge black masts and bronze detail. Used for commerce, the vessel was commanded by a North African prince referred to as Sultan. Haughtiness and confidence spilled from his ego. He had dark features, devilish shifty eyes and brows, and a neatly trimmed mustache goatee with a toothy sneer. His clothes flowed with the finest silks of trade and leather. He wore a silver ring that shined on his thumb, mounted with large gems of blue sapphire and red garnet. When the local people witnessed the Zoltan interacting with Charlie, a questionable merchant, they gawk and whisper among themselves.
How and why would the Zoltan carry on with the likes of that riffraff?
While making frequent trips to the gateway to hell, Zoltan often found himself among the lost and broken. Because misery loved company, this time he happened to fall deeply in love with what he believed to be a princess. She was no princess, but a powerful sorceress from Nigeria, and was referred to as the goddess of the seas by her people. Simone was both wise and gorgeous. She commanded the elements like no one else in her village, and her natural beauty and song were intoxicating. In her youth, she was provided with enough warning before the slave traders raided her village. She headed northbound toward the coast and landed in the gateway to hell. She quickly became notorious for using magic to enchant men to do exactly as she wished. She also used that same magic to hide herself from the slave traders by masquerading as an innkeeper and sex slave in her establishment. The Zoltan was no fool to the way of the Jezebel spirit, as he did not willingly go with Simone from the beginning. Consorting with a slave, and most definitely marrying a slave, would have been forbidden in his culture. Marriages in his world were based on alliances influencing trade. He could never marry her, even if he wanted to. Upon his arrival to the island, this mocha-skinned beauty with long black wavy hair, pouty lips, and a curvy hourglass shape made plans to serve her special oysters and love punch to potential takers, especially under the intense power of the coming hybrid eclipse. Whomever she chose to become her victim would help set her free by way of marriage. After meeting the Zoltan, she found him well-versed, fearless, wealthy, and the most compatible target. He ended up taking the bait due to his hunger and love for oysters. By morning, she had seductively enamored him. Earlier that day, while attending to her daily work, Simone had a long conversation with Charlie. He elected to pass on the free refreshments she offered him. They conversed about his voyage and the possibility of enlisting additional takers, who had ships with additional cargo room. While listening to Simone, he sympathized with this lovely woman's struggle. As a man who made a point to destabilize the oppressive system, he enjoyed helping slaves come up with plans to escape from the trade business. He knew she was looking for a way out, so he let her in on his little secret in hopes that she would be able to help him find more gents for the expedition. She perceived her favor from Charlie as being connected to the stars, which satisfied her ambitious nature. She tells herself,
"The gods must be looking down on me at this time to grant me access to these men."
Taking this new information to the Zoltan, she managed to persuade him to meet with Charlie and accompany him on his fantastic voyage. The third ship that came in that day was the Aqua Vitae, or Water of Life. It was commanded by a French privateer named Clovis. He was a minstrel of sorts and had been hired by the monarchs to discover secrets on how to make better or new spirits. Finding himself funny, he whistles a tune about being
on a quest to master spirits and spices.
He enjoyed entertaining women, but loved finding Egyptian treasure and rum even more. His ship was made in what he calls the Pasta or Ragu Sea and had been reclaimed in the Tangiers. It was considered to be quite valuable and a very large trading vessel. Clovis was casually having a drink at Simone's place when everyone met up to make arrangements for the long-haul trip.
Another Applejack.
He flippantly waves to Simone while sliding a pistole across the bar. A master of potions, Simone thought about pouring her homemade spirits into his cup. But he never took his eyes off her. Always looking for an angle, she continued to wonder how she could use him. He glided from his place at the bar to approach the group of men discussing the weight of rum and the possibility of having to pay tolls. The Zoltan, deep in punch-drunk love, was swimming in a mirage of ideas of capturing the Spanish loot. Staring at Simone's lips and breasts, he did not notice the savvy Frenchman's cheerful presence.
I can't help myself, but I must interject into your conversation. My name is Clovis. I happen to be exempt from paying tolls. May I be of service with my ship by joining this grand excursion?
With one hand innocently placed behind his back. Seeing an opportunity, Charlie kicked the Zoltan under the table to agree to bring Clovis along with his ship. The Zoltan, mid-trance, could not keep his eyes from Simone for more than a few seconds since tasting her potions. When she left his sight, he would recite mythos of his proclaimed love for her.
The sun fell in love with a mermaid and sent his tongue the rainbow.
He glosses over in his mind, and when she returns, he stares into her eyes to tell her,
The sun and the moon touched the waters at twilight, and the stars became their children.
Simone brushed his clinginess aside and continued to tidy up and help other customers. The Zoltan's words caused Simone to become full of conceit as she went about the day. Earlier that afternoon, her ego led her to share a story about her current secret liaisons with Clovis, trying to impress him. She gleamed with delight and satisfaction as her power intensified from the rare energy coming from the hybrid eclipse, which was making its way to the coast. Clovis twisted his blonde mustache and braided beard as she spilled the tea.
Go on,
he tells her, while scheming of a plan to take both Charlie and the Zoltan's share of the loot. Clovis was naturally a somber man who wore a long dark cloak while navigating the waters in order to blend in as needed. Meanwhile, the Zoltan did not trust any merchant of the seas, as they historically squabbled over command of the straits. Simone noticed that he was starting to become suspicious of Charlie and Clovis. So she grabbed him by the arm and pulls him in close to her chest, whispering close to his lips,
Merchants, mercenaries, missionaries, it's all business.
while laughing and squeezing his face to kiss him. Knowing both men would be preoccupied with their mistrust of each other, Clovis quietly focused on taking his share. He devised a master plan to make Charlie suspicious of the Zoltan as the taker of his new supply. He knew creating mistrust and suspicion would be easy after learning, by way of monarch spies, that Charlie renounced his royal family to masquerade as a merchant. The men stood on the pier to gather up their crew and ready their ships to set sail from the gateway of hell toward the islands of chance and beyond. Clovis found the men's choice of trophy vessels ironic, with the North African having a Spanish ship and the Spaniard having a North African ship.
Would you look at that?
He laughs to himself. Trusting in Charlie's etched map, he quickly led the unit straight to the location without hesitation. Charlie knew their time was limited, as the conquistadors would eventually make their way back from the trade routes to unload and restock their supply. The motley crew had to sneak in without being seen and hope to get out undetected while stealing the mother lode. He needed all hands on deck, as there was no time for treasonous inquisition or an Iron Maiden. When they arrived, Clovis delegates to the servant crew chief, with a wink of an eye,
Be sure to load my cargo last before we head back to Casablanca, as planned.
While tossing him a pistole. The crew would be working twice as hard to move the loot as they had been instructed and told they would be well compensated for their efforts. While all of the crews worked tirelessly moving things around, Charlie, the Zoltan, and Simone began to merrily celebrate on board the Moonshine. They partook from the endless supply of rum, cigars, chocolates, and furs. Dancing in a lavish coat near the stairs of the cabin deck, Simone caught sight of Clovis in her peripheral, rummaging through some of the items belonging to the Zoltan. Amphoras filled with salt to preserve scrolls did not look like much.
And what exactly are we doing?
Simone slyly asks Clovis.
I saw the Spaniard sneaking out of this cabin, and I wanted to investigate to see what he was up to.
He condescendingly replies, in which he did in fact see Charlie leave the cabin with something. Clovis felt the urge to threaten Simone with the possibility of him sending a letter to the slave traders on behalf of the monarchs, inferring that he would let them know about her existence and location if she were to tell anyone about his curiosity or tampering of the Zoltan's Zoltan's containers. He knew if the Zoltan were not under Simone's love spell, he would be indifferent to her enslavement and would most likely look the other way. Simone felt she was too close to her freedom to make a big deal out of it and did not want to be captured. Raising one of her brows, she curtsied toward Clovis, acquiescing back to the parley. Clovis continued to watch Simone with an evil side eye as she draped herself over the Zoltan like a wet towel. Clovis was certain he could outlast their drunken state and waited for all of them to pass out. Once the last body hit the floor to lay down their drunken heads, he gently untied all of the ships from the others, and they drifted apart off among the stars. Clovis paid off the other crew chiefs with the caveat that they would point the finger at the other crew when Charlie and the Zoltan found their loot taken. It was early in the morning, and the hybrid eclipse was upon them. The movement of the heavenly bodies was a magnificent sight to see amidst the horizon of the seas. When both Charlie and the Zoltan discovered their loot missing, they completely forgot about Clovis because they were too busy casting blame on each other, just as Clovis planned. Charlie boarded his vessel and gasped. He could not believe his eyes. Reaching for his chest to make sure his maps and the new black obsidian arrowhead amulet were still there. Clovis did indeed see Charlie in the great cabin the night before. As Charlie walked past the cabin, a container in the room began to glow. Peeking around the corner, he reached into the glowing amphora and pulled out a scroll with a black obsidian arrowhead that looked like a small dagger tied to a leather strap. The scroll itself was blank, and he decided the glow must be coming from the moon. He yanked the arrowhead from the strap and left the scroll behind. Once he slipped out of the cabin, he turned to see if the glow was still there, but it had gone away. The Zoltan began to reflect back on the items he had in his possession. While sorting through the Spanish reserves, he recognized Egyptian markings on the amphoras filled with salts, which had been stored among the chocolates and cigars. As a child, he had heard of stories in his village about certain scrolls containing wisdom and knowledge that made the holder prosperous. No one else seemed to see the value in the pottery nor the scrolls. Shrugging his shoulders, he told his crew to take all of the pottery, preserving the scrolls, and store them in his cabin for cooking. He could see how well the Spanish were doing with all of their riches, and he sensed the monarch's possession of the scrolls may have had something to do with their good fortune. The pottery's marking suggested that they had been there for a really long time, and he could not wait to study the scroll's contents at a later time. When Simone learned she had been fooled by Clovis, she became furious and began to cast a spell by summoning the waters to create a treacherous storm. As the walls of water began to crash upon the decks of their ships, the salt water splashed over the Zoltan and woke him from Simone's love spell. Out of confusion, he prepared for battle quickly with Charlie. Pacing the top deck, the Zoltan yells out from behind the massive black and bronze mast and shouts with a closed fist,
"You scoundrel! I curse you and your family. I curse that their hearts are stolen just like my cargo never to be returned, since all you gents know is how to steal just like your fathers."
Charlie thinks to himself,
"Damn, all I took was a stupid stone. This guy is something else."
while he squares up his smaller ship with the Zoltan's monstrosity of a ship. With his pride and integrity bruised, he stuck out his chest, knowing the North Africans can be barbaric in their beheadings and taking of limbs. He decides to yell out anyway.
"Touche, my friend. May your royal bloodline fall short of your excellency in this life and the next, you son of a pack saddle."
He spat into the sea and condescendingly bowed toward the Sultan. He swung away to try and steady his ship. There was no time for battle, as they were now more concerned with saving their ships. Simone stood by listening, floating in the waters with her arms folded. She boiled with anger because her plans had been thwarted. She threw her hands up in the air and stared toward the eclipse, scoffing with an evil eye.
"Let it be done. May both of your wishes come true."
While turning toward Clovis, sailing away in a safe distance, she glared at him with her opaque, stormy gray eyes. As lightning strikes overhead, she growls
As for you, you small miserable man, you can keep your spirit's treasures and women, but you and yours will never find true love, be happy or content, until both of these wretched families have children together. Your lineage must release their offspring from this curse of the hybrid eclipse, which can only be done by sacrificing whatever it is you love.
She calls out.
You think you've gotten away, but you will all pay.
With a nonchalant flick of her wrists towards the sky, she dove into the water and disappeared. The waters began to sway back and forth with huge tidal waves, tossing their ships around like rag dolls. The sky turned red as the fiery horns of the last part of the hybrid eclipse sank into the sea. By this time, Clovis had made his way to the coastline to escape the thrashing waters. However, he did not escape the effects of the curse of the hybrid eclipse. The merchants off the coast of Casablanca still talk about the day of the hybrid eclipse. They swore they saw the Kraken rise from the stormy and fiery waters and swallow 2 ships. As the waters began to calm down, several amphoras floated to the shore, landing on Casablanca's port. Hungry merchants swooped them up and traded them with a British antiquities dealer, who later stored them away in Egypt. Disgusted by the hearts of evil thieving men, Simone vowed to never return to Casablanca again, while cursing the port as being an evil and slippery place. Fading from Simone, floating in the water and staring at a light flickering in the distance near Casablanca, Rusty turned his gaze to Claire, who was staring at a light tower in the city. 4.
Wow.
Claire says as she leans back onto the sofa.
That's quite the story. It definitely fits with parts of the trade scroll prophecies that we have gathered thus far, especially the part about sacrificing that which it loves.
She states. Rusty adds.
We have been told that we will always have to deal with heavy energies, because our bloodline will have to face off against the worst kind of evil or darkness in order to break the curse of the hybrid eclipse and save the world. From what? No one really knows. The injustices we have endured throughout centuries have been terrible.
Thomas sat up from the sofa, wiped the bridge of his nose, and shook his head. From a place of understanding, he scoffs.
As per usual.
Claire chimes in.
Well, well, well. It appears the fates have brought the both of you together for more reasons than one.
With a smirk.
Cute.
Thomas answers back. Rusty adds.
It is said that a curse made by the energy of a hybrid eclipse could last a millennium.
What do you think, Claire? Are these timelines adding up?
Thomas inquires. Claire states.
Powerful curses can, at their worst, bind 100-fold. But for this curse to coincide with the trade scroll prophecy's timeline, the bind appears to be only 3-fold, ending sometime in the 30s, 2030s, that is. Perhaps our Siren of the Sea was torn between her feelings for the Zoltan and the proper execution of the curse. And if this is the case, it all checks out. The curse could be broken, and the world could be saved.
Hooah!
Thomas replies. Rusty looks around and says,
We've seen the trade scrolls, but whatever happened to the scroll I retrieved from the bunker?
Oh, we saved the best for last, Rusty.
Thomas grins.
Now for the big reveal.
He jokes. Thomas waited for Claire to hand him a long, flat box that she had stored away. He carefully laid the box down in front of Rusty. There was an anticipation of what new information they all might discover. As he lifted and slid the lid from the top, it was like he was looking at the scroll again for the first time. Squinting to adjust his eyes, he remembered the sacrifice he made for the artifact. He noticed the subtle purple-violet glow seeping from the opening. As Thomas stared into the hexagonal grid pattern of light with amazement, Rusty leaned in, and his amulet swung forward, as if he were being called to take a closer look. Thomas asks Rusty,
Do you mind if I try something? Hand me your necklace and let us see how far away we need to be before the glow goes away.
Rusty took off the arrowhead necklace and handed it to Thomas. Thomas backed away and walked down the hallway to about the distance he measured while he was in Paramount.
That's weird. The scroll's glow should go away.
He says out loud.
That means it's not your necklace, Rusty, that led you to the scroll. It was you.
He explains like he is looking at a ghost. Claire looked at both of them and covered her mouth in awe. Rusty never really took his eyes away from the scroll. He was fixated on trying to figure out the symbols he had also seen on the trade scrolls and the words, "May you be happy," that beamed across the top of the supernatural papyrus, like an introduction. The lines looked like veins pulsating through a hexagonal pattern of mercurial liquid. Claire could also see the glow, but not the words.
What does it say, Rusty?
She says with curiosity. Rusty widened and blinked his eyes, stretching for additional insight. He could not believe what he was seeing or reading. Carefully studying the symbols to translate the words as they shapeshift across the scroll, he says,
This scroll is referred to as the Baal's, no, the Lord's Scroll, or Master Scroll. Yes, the Master Scroll, created by the power, the source, supreme beings, insects, no, the source, and whomever holds this scroll is the Lord or Master of prosperity or trade.
Drinking in all he could with his eyes as the words moved across the paper, there was also a telepathic knowing of what the scroll wanted to communicate with him. Out of shock, he says,
Anyone who adds life to this scroll by scribing their name in blood will be able to call out the domain they wish to become the master of. Thus, their bloodline or anyone they associate with will benefit from the source's power.
Thomas and Claire look at each other like they hit the jackpot.
And?
Thomas insists.
There appears to be some sort of caveat to adding your name. You must sacrifice that which you love. There is also a list of masters.
So it's like a secret decoder of masters, a key.
Claire asks as her eyes widen.
Yes, I see signatures from the beginning declaring the master of everything, the master of the ocean, the master of the seas, the master of the waters, the master of civilization, the master of knowledge, the master of economics, the master of men, the master of warfare, the master of the world, and the very last line says, to light the way.
Rusty runs through the messages. Thomas could not believe Rusty was able to read the blank scroll the way he did, after wasting all of his time searching for alternative clues. Rusty turned to look at Thomas and Claire with a golden sheen that appeared to be fading from his eyes.
You, my friend, are definitely connected to everything, the key to it all,
Thomas states, while staring at Rusty like he is in the abyss.
If the gods knew about Rusty's link to the scrolls, this could be a shit show.
He thinks to himself. He knows the importance of any connection to the trade scrolls.
For now, I will downplay all of this new information until I learn more.
He reminds himself. Waiting for more information was the name of his game. Rusty waved his hands over the glowing pattern that seemed to follow his hand and took in the scroll's supernatural properties one last time to remember the powerful energy.
Let me attempt to understand. A master retains the power to control their domain, but loses that which they love. Their bloodline obviously has access to the scroll and its benefits, and affiliates with a master or bloodline also experiences the prosperity of trade by way of association, like a kind of luck, but they are unable to access its power directly or read the scrolls. Does that sound about right?
Thomas summarizes out loud.
Do we know who these masters are, other than their domain? Were there any names, Rusty?
Claire asks. Rusty looked drained. He says,
That's everything. It all seems like a blur because the words disappear once I read them. Like this is your chance to learn. Pay attention.
Claire could see the wheels turning in Thomas's head. She sighs.
Do you all mind if we put these away for now? I'm starving.
She carefully puts the scroll and box away with the rest of the trade scroll collection. Thomas, Rusty, and Claire decided to leave her place and find somewhere to have a drink and a bite to eat. Rusty struggled to walk up and down the city's steep streets. They eventually found a place and sat down. While at the table, they began to conceive a plan and a way to move forward with all of the new information they gained. While waiting for their order, Thomas thought about how much he had missed Claire while he was away, and his newfound fondness for Rusty. He never looked at Rusty with pity, because he knew that would add insult to his injuries, but he felt for him. Rusty was the only guy he knew who could take a beating while keeping his composure and remain lighthearted noted, often being snubbed by the public. They would call Rusty names like Stubbs and Cripple. Thomas didn't like the way Rusty was treated when they were together, but he knew Rusty had a thick skin and let the insults roll off his back. The culture in the city was different, and Thomas noticed way less judgment of Rusty's disability there. Rusty enjoyed his time with Thomas and Claire while in the city. He was grateful he was able to share his secret with them and be a part of the journey. Before the evening ended, it was decided that Thomas would 5. Meanwhile, two other groups, the ghouls and the angels, were using their best spiritual practitioners to perform dark magic in order to learn more about future events and the source of the gods' wealth, the trade scrolls. During their inquiries of each other's realms, the ghouls sat in dark dungeons of stench, where the stone walls dripped with decaying matter, a grimy residue collected from entering and returning from the realm of the dead. Their advisor stood at an altar staring into the mirror of the living, while calling out questions about the ghouls' rise or fall from power. Failure was not an option for them. They were consistent and relentless in doing all they could to seek out any knowledge regarding how they may have lost the war. They wanted to know whom was responsible for their downfall and their whereabouts, while quelling any deterrents threatening to interfere with their current plans. As the ghoul's advisor stared into the realm of light, the perspective shifted to the other side of the mirror, where the angel's advisor stared back into the realm of the dead. They focused on gaining insight and harnessing power from the unnatural. This was done by channeling and collecting knowledge from those who had passed away. They called it a baptism of the dead and reasoned the ritual was needed to save lost souls. This is how they justified their actions, because they could never be seen as performing what normal people would call folk magic. Both groups discovered information about a child who would prevent them from achieving absolute power. Both groups, equally dark and dangerous, presented themselves in the same manner, but resided in different spiritual realms. The ghouls reveled in all things gruesome, revolting, and dead, hell-bent on destroying the lineage of those who beat them in the Second World War, to include Rusty and his family. The ghouls were sworn enemies of the gods because they perceived themselves as being intellectually superior. They spied on the gods' networks and patterns, hoping they could infiltrate and corrupt the gods' systems. The ghouls used reverse social engineering methods to develop and implement their sweet revenge, manipulating social norms and behaviors in institutions like education, finance, infrastructure, and the military were their main targets. A ghoul sat in a wet, musty, and dark room where a single light bulb dangled from the ceiling. They worked tirelessly in shifts to track systems and design organizational charts to plot points of weakness. The radio in the background playing Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd abruptly stopped. They flicked ash and smashed their cigarette out into an ashtray before pulling down the levers to shut off the power and lights. The angels, on the other hand, were doing anything they could to maintain a false sense of prophetic power and look for ways to mimic and infiltrate the way of the gods. 2 angels interviewed their members, gathering details about any new business ideas they acquired via corporate espionage. Like many others, they repeatedly failed in their attempts to become part of the club. When the angels learned that one of the gods chosen would be born in their territory, they decided to make their territory an isolated research lab. This was the perfect opportunity for them to control for and learn the ways of the gods. They were obsessed with the idea of having a kind of god control over their people. Their goals and ticket to immortality revolved around observing and oppressing the child spoken about in the prophecy, the one whose power would eventually circumvent their plans to achieve world domination. The gods knew about the ghouls, as they had battled them several times throughout history. As for the angels, they were savvy enough to hide their agenda from the gods. As they went about their angelic business, the gods did not pay much attention to the angels, and in the future they were going to wish they did. The gods were brutal and the most exclusive group in the world. They viewed challenges and war games as an opportunity to achieve greatness and glory among themselves. They created a game where they pick the players to represent their interests, all of which is a form of high-stakes entertainment for them. They interacted and blended in with the mortals, or normies. They had to account for their half-demon or demigod children in order to maintain exclusive and elusive power among the masses. For the gods, the concept of falling in love was to be viewed as a cautionary tale and something to be avoided. Doing the most to withhold love, the strongest and most uncontrollable force, from the players who were worthy of attaining god status. By breadcrumbing those individuals to do the god's will, this gave false hope of obtaining true love. God status was equivalent to one's ability to influence. This twisted manipulation of people's lives, which caused harm and suffering, was perceived as a way to create their best champions. Champions in the past were assembled by finding individuals with genuine intentions to serve the greater good, finding individuals willing to make sacrifices in the name of love. Only then, in victory, were the champions rewarded with the freedom to seek their true desires. The gods had the power to make things happen or not happen. They knew, via gameplay, which situations or events were about to occur and the people who were going to be involved in those said events. Some of these events led to key moments of gloriousness in history. Now, the gods were partial to Rusty and his bloodline. They were linked to Charlie, the Spanish prince from the Curse of the Hybrid Eclipse. Thomas designed many of the gods' systems, and they were well aware of how everyone would play a pivotal role in the Trade Scroll prophecies. The gods had a front row seat to Rusty's sacrifice of himself for the greater good in the war against the ghouls when he obtained the artifact. Rusty showed bravery and courage, both characteristics and traits of a god. They rewarded him and his bloodline with the favor to overcome challenges and all of the resources they would need to face the ignorance of evil, the kind of evil that presented itself as a savior while condemning the world. Rusty's chosen grandchild was an innocent victim and may end up being a sacrificial lamb. The chosen child brought the attention of an outside group, one that could see all timelines, especially those disruptions in the natural fabric of time. The disturbances caused by the great lengths the ghouls and the angels went to capture power was always on their radar. This group knew this particular child's life would be altered by an unnatural reality forced upon them. They also knew the child would achieve great victory during the gods' trials. The unnatural disruption created in what the angels saw as an insignificant child's life had the potential of destroying the world. To become a champion would be the child's fate. To become the David to the Goliath, a gladiator who would work in step with others to break curses, fulfill prophecies, and light the way forward. The insects referred to their divine intervention as karmic justice. Some of the gods took delight thinking of the chaotic events to come. Some of them snubbed the idea of having significant trials completed by someone they perceived as being ordinary. The end of the world was out of the gods' control. They knew that events would be in the hands of God with an uppercase G. They also understood there were entities much stronger than they. Those entities had access to multiple timelines, the ability to shapeshift and manipulate time, and were empathetic with weaker species. They strived to protect humanity from itself and did not play the gods' games. They referred to these entities as the insects. The gods joked about the insects being the only thing to survive the apocalypse due to their out-of-this-world technology, vast amounts of resources, and inability to die. If there ever came a time where the planet was set to be destroyed, the insects would have allowed the destruction to occur. The insects kept a close eye on decisions being made by the gods. They understood and sensed the motives in the hearts of humans.